More than 20,000 people took to the streets in Vienna over the weekend to show support for migrants and reject a recent upswing in support for Austria's right-wing, Anti-Immigration Freedom Party, FPÖ. Last month alone, about 200,000 refugees and migrants entered the nation of 8.5 million, fueling support for the FPÖ in recent provincial elections and national polls. Protesters, including students and families with children, marched towards Parliament, holding up posters reading "In with the refugees, out with the FPÖ and no walls around Europe." FPÖ leader Heinz-Christian Strache, who vows to protect what he calls Austria's Christian and Western identity, is running for mayor of Vienna in an October 11 election. "We're very worried about Strache doing well in the Vienna election," said Christof, a 28-year-old who works for the city administration, wearing a badge with Strache's face crossed out. Strache has called for a fence to be built around Austria to stem the flow of migrants, many of whom pass through the country on their way to their preferred destination, Germany. Only 9,000 people asked for asylum in Austria last month, with the rest looking to settle further north in Europe. In Finland, which on Friday said it expected about 50,000 asylum seekers to reach the country this year compared to 3,600 in 2014, hundreds of people protested to urge the center-right government to clamp down on immigration. The recession-hit Nordic country is struggling to cope with the influx, and demonstrators at the anti-immigration rallies in Tornio, Helsinki, Lahti, and other cities said authorities were doing too much to help the migrants. "We want the state to take care of its own," said Junzilka, one of about 400 people who participated in the Tornio demonstration, some chanting "Close the borders." Drawn by an existing Iraqi community and eased asylum criteria, Iraqi refugees in particular have in recent months traveled through Central Europe and Sweden, crossing the Finnish border at the small town of Tornio near the Arctic Circle. "Instead of taking the asylum seekers who come through Sweden, we should turn them back," Lka added. Several smaller counter-protests were held by anti-racism groups to support migrants in the nation of 5.5 million people. Prime Minister Juha Sipilä himself has shown openness towards the refugees, offering his house in the north to be used by the asylum seekers. But the migrant crisis is a big challenge for CO-ruling Eurosceptic party the Finns, which has long campaigned for tighter controls of immigration. As Germany celebrated 25 years since reunification on Saturday, President Joachim Gauck said Europe's refugee crisis posed a greater challenge to the country than the welding together of Western Germany and the former communist East. Gauck, a former Lutheran pastor from East Germany who played a prominent role in the peaceful protests there that led to the fall of the Berlin Wall in 1989, said the two halves of the country had become one over the past quarter of a century. "What belongs together has grown back together," he told an audience in Frankfurt that included Chancellor Angela Merkel and civil rights campaigners from the former East. But Gauck said the process of restoring unity had been much harder than many people had imagined amid the euphoria of 1989 and 1990. Back then, West Germans cheered and clapped their Eastern peers as they crossed the border that had separated them for decades in their Trabis, the iconic cars of East Germany. More recently, Germans have applauded refugees as they arrived at Munich's central train station. The government estimates that 800,000 or more people might come to Germany over the course of 2015. Gauck, who has a largely ceremonial role but is considered a moral authority for the nation, warned that integrating refugees with different religions and cultures would be much tougher than uniting Germans, who had shared the same language, national culture, and history even during their separation. "Just like in 1990, we're all facing a challenge that will occupy us for generations. But unlike back then, something is now supposed to grow together that has not belonged together until now," he said. Gauck urged Germans to be patient, saying it would take time to get used to an environment in which some of what is familiar is gone, while refugees would need time to get used to a society that would sometimes put them in conflict with their traditional norms. Gauck urged refugees to make an effort to integrate into German society and stressed that German values such as human dignity, equal rights for women and respect for the secular law regardless of any religious affiliations were not up for debate. His comments reflect growing concern in Germany that the huge influx of refugees could put strain on the liberal values at the heart of modern democratic Germany, and he suggested the country would not show tolerance in return for intolerance. While still welcoming the newcomers, Germany is now focusing increasingly on the need to ensure respect for German culture. Germany has translated parts of its constitution which outline basic rights such as freedom of speech into Arabic. Most of the refugees fleeing conflicts and poverty in the Middle East, Africa, and beyond come from conservative Muslim societies with much more traditional ideas about the role of women and other issues. Gauck and Merkel, who also grew up behind the Iron Curtain in the former East, both called for more help from other countries in dealing with the refugee crisis. Germany can't solve the problem alone, but only in cooperation with Europe by a fair division of tasks and with the rest of the world, she said. Gauck also called for people to show understanding for Eastern European countries and even Eastern Germany taking a different stance in the debate on refugees to Western Europe. While Western Germany was able to get used to being a country of immigration over decades, he said, many people in the East had hardly had any contact with immigrants before 1990. There are still far fewer migrants in Eastern Germany than in the west of the country.